Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to our session on the future of education in an age of grand challenges. This session is presented as part of the 125th anniversary of the University of St. Gallen. My name is Sona Taliat and I'm part of the IT team in the St. Gallen Symposium and also a second-year bachelor student at the University of St. Gallen. I'm thrilled to be here today to explore the evolving landscapes of education and its response to the changing needs of our society. In this session, we will be discussing how education must adapt to remain relevant and effective. As new technologies emerge and societal and economic structures shift, it is critical that education institutions and practices transform accordingly. We will examine new approaches and technologies that can be leveraged to engage students and prepare them for the challenges of the future. This is especially relevant today when we think of education as a role in the cultivating of the next generation of self-determined citizens. For me, this is especially interesting from an IT perspective, looking at new technologies like ChatGPT. So what do you do when our papers, assignments, and homework can suddenly be written by an AI language tool? I realized for me how quickly I got used to having this extra help and getting a ready-made answer to almost all my school questions. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion that is about to follow, and I'm honored to hand over the word to the president of our university, Professor BernhardEhrenzeller.
Thank you very much, Lynn. Dear guests, honored guests, and of course, first of all, dear leaders of tomorrow. One of the answers to the introduction could be a genius taught us that time is relative. That's perhaps more important than we thought now just in this discussion. And therefore, the history of our history of St. Gallen, we have a history of 125 years, may be a festive occasion for us here at the university, while it would mark only a short episode in the timeline of other universities. After all, the founding of the oldest university, in the world dates back to 1088. The University of Bologna, the famous Bologna, dates back centuries before we knew the true extent of our world. Centuries even before the printing press revolutionized the dissemination of knowledge. Yet in spite of technological, social, and political upheavals, universities, whatever their profile, whatever their age, remained true to their core purpose, pursuing knowledge. Independent pursuing of knowledge, it seems to me very important, and thus truth and passing it on to the next generation, discussing and questioning it with the generation that would build on the existing body of knowledge. I believe that this mission will remain at the heart of education on all levels and in all contexts. Nevertheless, it is obvious that we stand at a critical juncture and that changes are imminent. The founding document of Switzerland's oldest university, my personal alma mater, Basel, declares that the purpose of science is to guide us towards the good life. Yet depending on the circumstances of our birth, said a good life has always been illusory. And even those born into privileged parts of the world consider it ever more elusive. Particularly in the generation of you, the leaders of tomorrow, point to the clock and remind us of all, not only the time is relative, the clock is relentlessly ticking. And the time to preserve the foundations of what we deem a good life, a livable planet, is slipping away. 2030 is only 7 years away. The number 7 is considered a lucky number But in the current circumstances, it's only one thing, a bloody short time to avert the worst. Universities have long lost the monopoly over knowledge production. And when it comes to learning how we can move society in the right direction, all of us depend on more fluid, more flexible structures. In a time of grand challenges, if not the grandest challenge, it's key to imagine the university anew. People like me at the helm of the university need to do one thing in particular to rise to the occasion: listen and learn from you, the leaders of tomorrow. With that said, I look forward to learning a lot in the coming minutes and to keep my ears open throughout the remainder of the symposium and, as we hope, beyond. Thank you very much.
Choreographed. Sorry about this. I'm going first because I'm the furthest. So we got that part right. This is a good start. So my name is Jean-François Manzoni. I'm the president of IMD, the International Institute for Management Development. And the only reason why I'm standing here is because they asked me to be the topic leader, because these four speakers have much more distinguished credentials to be on this particular panel and are bringing, as you're going to hear in the next minute, a very diverse set of experiences and expertise. The topic, of course, is the future of education in an age of grand challenges. I think and I hope that it's going to be the future of education and not only the future of universities, even though some of us are active in universities. I think also, as you just said, President, there's also a lot of other new actors that are increasingly playing a very important role, educating the youth and also the not so young. Voilà. So very briefly, a very brief introduction. I'm not going to do justice to everything you've done in your life. Tabata Amaral is a member of the Brazilian Parliament. And I think you're representing São Paulo. And it does say that you are a member of the Brazilian Socialist Party. So I guess that this is an official part of your biography. You're also very interested in issues of education. And you were telling me just earlier that yesterday you were also in meetings trying to help foster the change in the Brazilian tax code. Voilà. So a member of parliament, very interested in education. And I think it is fair to say probably one of the younger members, I would assume, of the Brazilian parliament. Pascal Awa is the president of a university in Ghana called HSG University. HSG means beginning. What is also interesting is he's not only the president of that university, he's also the founder of that university. Wow. This school has gathered a number of awards, including being one of the best places to work for in Ghana, the only university on that list. Patrick, in particular, himself has won an incredible number of awards. For him, as one of the best CEOs in Ghana, as a MacArthur Fellow, and so on. I told him before this session that he is by far the record holder of the discrepancy between number of awards received and number of awards mentioned in his bio. But also bringing the work of a lifetime to create a university that is picking up steam and is being increasingly recognized. Esther Wojcicki is also incredibly difficult to describe. You have a lifetime as an educator in high schools, but also educating educators, also a personal practice as an educator, because you've had 3 daughters who are incredibly accomplished, and that has led you to reflect on what did we actually get right and how do you help develop outstanding young individuals. You're also an educational entrepreneur involved in a large number of ventures. and across countries and continents. So really looking forward to hearing your perspective on the topic from, again, multiple perspectives. And of course, coming from the US, I should say. And Professor MiriamMeckel, initially German, initially in the political world also, or supporting, I think you were, let me see, State Secretary in the portfolio of the Minister President of the State of North Rhine-Westphalia. Then the editor-in-chief and publisher of Wirtschaftswoche, and more recently, a professor of communications management at the University of St. Gallen, the director at the Institute for Media and Communication Management, and also a co-founder and CEO of ADA Learning, a one-year community-based program that you're going to tell us about, which is incredibly interesting, is an element of lifelong learning. But one of the things that struck me is you don't have students, you have fellows, which I thought was very interesting. So give them a warm hand of applause and big thanks for being here. So maybe if we can go once around the group, starting with, if we want to talk about the future of education in an age of grand challenges, what are some of these grand challenges from your perspective? So I think this way we can leverage the diversity of this group as opposed to all try to come up with the same. So maybe if we can start with you, grand challenges of education from your perspective.
Okay, so first of all, it's very nice to be here. Good morning to everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's my first time at St. Gallen Symposium. It's important to say that I come from one of the poorest areas of São Paulo in Brazil. I attended public schools myself. So yes, I'm planning on talking about the technological revolution and all of its impact in the labor market. But it's also important for me to say that in Brazil, we have to deal with very old problems. I am today the president of the Parliamentary Bench of Education that unites both Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. And we had very basic issues to deal with. So one example, one of the laws that I'm probably the most proud of having fought for and presented was a law to make sure that girls would have pads to attend public schools. So out of 4 girls, we would have 1 that had missed school because they didn't have money to buy pads. And I cannot ignore that problem. And we had to fight 3 years to make sure that this law would actually be implemented. Another fight that was very important to us during the pandemic was related to the fact that 5 million students in Brazil could not have online education because they didn't have access to technology or internet. So yes, we need to talk about, again, the technological revolution, but if we don't have internet access in our country, like that's a dumb debate. And we had, again, to fight 3 years in the education caucus to make sure that we would give access to 14 million students and 18 million students and 1.5 teachers in terms of technology and internet. We also had to fight a lot to make sure that in the 5G public auction, schools would be included, because education is important to every politician in the discourse, but it's really hard for you to see that actually being implemented. So I'm talking about that because it's really hard to think about those very big issues when you have so high rates of illiteracy, as it is the case in Brazil. So most of my time as an education activist, as a congresswoman, is devoted to those very basic issues, like those old problems. But I also want to discuss the new problems, the current challenges. And to sum up, I think one thing that is really important to me is to make sure that we think all those changes in the idea of lifelong learning. That's a concept that I believe you all are aware of, but that means that we'll have to build in society, it's broader than education, a system in which we can constantly go back to school. And we are talking about jobs changing all the time, the economy, the market changing all the time, And we are not ready to do that. There is this bill that was approved in the Chamber of Deputies. I presented it. It's now in the Senate. And we are trying to change small things. So, for instance, in Brazil, if you attend higher education and you did 3 out of 4 years, you have nothing. You don't have a diploma. But you have learned so much. You have acquired some abilities. So this bill proposes that we leave this model of diplomas and we talk about certifying the knowledge that was acquired. We are talking about building blocks. So I want to make sure there's a lot of prejudice to technical and professional education in Brazil. So I want to make sure that if you attended a professional education when you were in high school or after, these credits can be accounted for so you can have an undergraduate degree faster. Because in Brazil, like they will say that the rich attend undergrad, the poor attend technical education, but actually out of 5 students, 2 are not even finishing high school. So we have to make those changes. I don't want to make myself too long, but one thing that we are also fighting for in this bill is to make sure that more players are involved in curriculum building. So right now it's in the hands of the government. The private sector doesn't have a say, but we go beyond. We want to make sure that students are heard in the process and that this process is much faster because we might need to change the curriculum every 3-4 years, who knows? So that's a summary of our fights, and I cannot say if the old problems or the new problems are more important. I just know that somehow we'll have to find a way in Brazil to tackle both of them at the same time. And again, I'm really honored to be here, especially with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I propose to not repeat what you just said. Let's hear from the 3 colleagues, and then we'll see what themes are common, and we'll try to pick them up then. Okay?
All right. So I grew up in Ghana and then went to college in the United States and then went to work at Microsoft. At some point, I decided to stop that career and get into education in Africa to return back to Ghana. And
in fact, if I may, you started doing this, I guess, during your MBA at Berkeley,
correct.
Right? It's the summer project between year 1 and year 2.
Correct. So I quit Microsoft, went to business school, and then I started this project in business school. Now, there was a grand challenge in my mind, why to do this? And very simply, it's a challenge of getting Africa to a point where we have a triumphant Africa, a successful Africa, where Africans are firmly on the path to sustainable development. And it's a challenge of, simply put, the future happiness of a people, okay? Now, it seemed to me that to get there, we needed to be very intentional about educating the future leaders of the continent in such a way that they would be deeply ethical and effective as leaders. So that's the grand challenge that HSG University was formed on the basis of. Now, moving forward, I think we see that there are other big challenges. We did this exercise a couple of years ago, asking the question, what does the world look like 30 years from now? And what do we need to do today to be relevant in that world 30 years from now? And when you do that exercise, you see the big waves. And it's a massive demographic growth in Africa, right? So the population is going to double in the next 30 years from about 1.2 billion people to 2.5 billion. It's climate change. It's the challenge of integrating Africa and having softer borders between countries. It's the challenge of new emerging technologies and the 4th industrial revolution and what that means for us, and the opportunities that brings that we can leverage. It is the challenge of making Africa one of the largest markets, contiguous markets in the world, and also a manufacturing center in the world. This morning, it dawned on me that there is actually another grand challenge in the world, which is a move away from globalization and an increasing belligerence between countries, which will upset our ability to deal with these other challenges, and something that, as educators, we need to pay a lot of attention to. So as we proceed, these are sort of the grand challenges that we think about, and we let it guide our work in terms of what we do, and we can come back to specifically what we're doing at HSG later on in this conversation.
Wonderful. May I add one thing that I learned recently about Africa? We are very fortunate at IMD to work with an organization called OCP, l'Office Chérifien des Phosphates. It's a Moroccan company that specializes in fertilizer. And one day I was discussing with the CEO of that company, who said we're very involved, of course, in improving productivity of the agriculture sector in Africa. And I said, yes, that's obviously extremely important for the African population. And he said, yes, that's true. You're also missing an important point, which is that 2/3 of the arable land that is currently not cultivated in the world sits in Africa. And so agriculture in Africa is, of course, of primary importance for Africa. It is also of primary importance for the whole world, because by 2050, if Africa does not contribute significantly, not only to feed Africa, but to feed the world will have a huge issue. So that's a comment for the centrality of Africa for all of us, which honestly I didn't know until very recently.
That's correct.
Esther, you have a connection with education and an involvement in education over a number of decades in a range of activities. From that very eclectic perspective, what are the grand challenges in your view?
So thank you very much again for including me, and I'm really happy to be here. And I must say that this has been one of the most inspirational summits that I've been to. So really, I want to thank the organizers. So I think the biggest grand challenge that I see, not just for here in Europe or actually in the United States, but worldwide, is the role of the teacher. I think that right now, the number one block for major change in education is that the teacher is still the number one importer of information. The classes are still frontal. The teacher lectures, the students take notes, and then they follow what the teacher and the book says, and then they repeat. And so one of the reasons that I'm excited about being here is this conference illustrates to me the power of young people. This conference is organized, if you haven't noticed it already, by students. And the students have done an amazing job. And in the world, everywhere in the world, we need to give students more say in their education. Instead of always telling them what to do, we need to let them be intergenerational, as they're talking about. Let them also contribute to what is going on in their classes, what is going on in their learning, what are they thinking about. This method of teaching starts early, kindergarten. We teach kids to line up, to sit quietly, to not think, but to follow directions, and then it continues all the way through college. And everybody is doing exactly what the professor is telling them to do. So where are we going to get this intergenerational collaboration if we don't start early? Kids are afraid to even say what they think for fear that it, quote, won't be right. And the answer is, what is right? How are we going to figure out the problems that we're talking about here in Africa and in Brazil, as long as we're applying the answers of yesterday to the problems of today? So that's what I think is the biggest challenge that I see worldwide in education. Can we include those young people, and can we include their ideas? Can we have 20% of the curriculum that's produced in schools worldwide, 20% given to the students, called perhaps Creativity Day, or some opportunity for students to have a role and to think before they graduate? Because when they graduate, What are they going to do? I wrote a book in which I interviewed a lot of CEOs. The book's called How to Raise Successful People. And the number one problem that CEOs said is that all the young people coming out of the universities, they all want to know, am I doing it right? It's like, really? We hired you because you're inspirational or you think creatively, but they're afraid. So that's what I see as the problem. And, I'm not telling you that I've tried this in my program. So I taught, as you said, for 4 decades. And I have the program in Palo Alto High School, the largest media program in the United States, with hundreds, actually 700 kids taking media studies, journalism. So the question is, why do these kids all want to take this program? Why would a teenager want to learn to write? Most teenagers would rather do anything else. The reason they do it is because I give them freedom. I give them the opportunity to be in charge, the opportunity to work in groups. Collaboration is one of the keys. And so I'd like to see that in all schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last, but of course not least, and difficult, because already so much has been said, but again, you're bringing to this your own perspective, grand challenges from your perspective, Miriam.
Yeah, I will try to take a different approach, leading to the question we're discussing, the future of education. And my question would be, what is education? I'm not even sure we still know what we're talking about. That relates to a lot of points you mentioned, 3 of you, but I think it goes way beyond. So in my observation, a major part of how we educate people, be it in school, be it at the university, be it in executive education, is based on teaching people factual knowledge. And we are at a breaking point of time where we observe that what is happening in the field of generative AI at the moment will turn that totally nonsense, basically. Because you can ask machines everything you want to know. And even if they sometimes come up with hallucinations and with wrong information, that will get better. And the whole idea of teaching people what they should know about this world we're living in the way we do it, might be really a difficult approach. So I think if we want to understand what education should be about, we have to take into account that people need to learn very different things in the future, way more than we do it right now. And that means, for example, that building and helping people grow into individuals, into personalities, in a way that we're not doing it right now, as to my observation, will be much more important. I think that critical thinking will be something we really have to focus on. And I also think that people will have to learn to deal with uncertainty and trust systems they cannot explain. So no one in this room, or maybe some of you, but I don't know, will be able probably to explain how the AI algorithms that ChatGPT is using to help us produce text, or Midjourney is using to help us produce visualizations of our world, how this works. And we also cannot explain how a car works. Most of us can't. But we learn to build trust in these systems to work with them. So this will be a period of ambiguity, a period of uncertainty, and a period of challenging human knowledge we are just starting to enter. That will be quite something for many of us. And if we don't learn to deal with it, we will be quite lost in this transformation time we are living in. And it even goes to the point of the question where I think that the education system will have to deal with the question, what exactly is human? And what exactly do humans bring to the table in an equation where machines, computers, AI will take more and more of what we once thought is our unique capability of driving this world, changing this world, making a personal career, making a difference to the world we are living in. This will be challenged in so many ways, and I observe that humans tend to mystify everything they cannot explain. So it's more like almost a religionization of technological transformation we are observing right now, with all the discussions about AGI, general artificial intelligence. That is not what we should be aiming for. And the education system would need to take this up in a way that we understand what is human, that we understand what we can bring to the table in a collaborative field where machines and algorithms will become more and more important, and how we reconnect to our human capabilities that, again, as to my observation, we have lost in many ways. Trying to get factual, trying to store knowledge, trying to become more like machines and not more like humans. And that's a basic approach to the education system on all levels that I don't see at the moment, and I'm quite worried that we are basically seeing a disruption of how we try to evolve ourselves while technology is just doing it in a way that we cannot even fathom.
Thank you very much. Now, of course, this could be the moment where I regret accepting to moderate this panel, because now I'm supposed to come up with something smart to say. Fortunately, you helped a great deal. I think one of the themes that has come through all four of you is this notion that one of the purposes, or maybe the key purpose of education, is to develop individuals who have the ability to think intelligently and critically and ethically. There's an aspect of also somewhat autonomously, and I think there's also an aspect of confidence that has come up in a number of your opening statements. And one of the possibilities, or one of the ideas that has been mentioned, is that if we want the education process to achieve this, we need to give more co-creation possibility to the learners. Let's call them students or learners. And of course, that's simple to say, but it's hard to do, because we have people who have spent a lifetime learning how to become intermediaries in this knowledge adventure. So here, I'm going to start maybe with you, Patrick. You created a university from scratch.
Right.
How challenging was it to create or to embed within this university some degree of co-creation and some development of this autonomous thinking and of this confident functioning?
Well, we created this university in a context where learning was really rote memorization. That was what we were stepping into. And saying we were going to build a university that was going to be completely different. It was going to be about creativity, about critical thinking, about asking deep questions about ethics and what kind of society we want. And there's so much you have to do. You have to work with the faculty, you have to work with the students, you have to work with the administrators, all together to create an institution like this. I'll give you an example of some very simple things that we do. When students first come to HSG University, some of the first tasks they're given are not based on things that they've learned from high school or things that they've learned from us. We just give them a design task. So orientation week, they're in teams, we give them some materials and we say, go build something. And they compete on building this thing. The first engineering class that they take at HSG University is a design class where, again, in teams, they design and build a system. And they learn just what they need to build a simple system. It might be a robot, it might be a drone. They've not done any of the hard math or hard physics or all of those things. It's just getting together and figuring it out. And what they learn from that experience is, well, engineering is hard. Engineering is fun. we can learn from, we can search for information.
Right.
We can do research, and we can gather the data. We can go to the instructor and ask for assistance. But at the end of the semester, we will have built a machine that does something, right? And that kind of approach is really involving students from the very beginning in, building their confidence, letting them realize that they have agency, and they should use that agency in their learning, and to carry that through the rest of their 4 years.
Confidence, agency, but also somehow a responsibility.
Yes.
What this is also telling them is don't look at the teacher and expect everything to come from the teacher. You're going to have to co-create some of this.
That's correct. And we do that in courses which are not also around technology. So there's a lot of discussion. We have a leadership seminar series. There's a first one on what constitutes a good leader. They read a bunch of books, and they debate what are the attributes of a good leader with each other. They role play ethical dilemmas. Literally, there's a situation, it's a case. Some of it is a real case that maybe an alum has brought to the classroom, and they role play, how do we solve this? They will read books about how do you do the governance or the economy of a good society, and again, a lot of debate and discussion about it. They'll do a leadership seminar that is titled Leadership as Service, and you have to go out in the community and serve in some capacity and write about the experience and what you learned from it. And so having that sort of engagement with each other and having a very experiential approach to learning, to teaching and learning, builds the kinds of agency and confidence that we've talked about.
So I'm hearing learning also by doing and reflecting. I'm also learning together.
That's correct.
Now, please allow me to play devil's advocate just for a second.
Sure.
Isn't there in this process somehow a bit of an inefficiency involved? Because, it took some of us many, many years to have an intelligent perspective on ethical dilemmas, on how to do this and do that. And in essence, we're saying to the teacher, don't volunteer too much of this information, create a context when they're going to figure this out. How do you balance the efficiency of somebody who kind of knows something, sharing it with the population of learners, and the learners developing this by themselves, and to some extent kind of reinventing the wheel?
Well, actually, they're not reinventing the wheel. They're smarter than you think.
Okay. I'm playing devil's advocate. Huh? I'm playing devil's advocate.
Okay, good.
I'm inviting you to explain to us why those folks who think this way are wrong.
Okay. Yes. I mean, honestly, kids are really smart these days. They get a lot of information online by themselves. And back in the previous era, if you wanted to learn something, you either had to go to the library and get a book, or you had to listen to a teacher. But we don't have to do that anymore. Okay. We can find all this information out online. And yes, there is some inefficiency. I must say the main thing that people are worried about when they give kids some control is chaos. There is a little bit of chaos, but it's exciting. They all want to be there. They talk to each other. The whole format it looks like a company, actually. If you go into a company, you don't see people all lined up in rows waiting for the CEO to talk. You see them working in groups. And so that's basically what it looks like in the classroom. They work in groups. And it's not like I don't say anything. Trust me, I'm opinionated enough. It's just that I don't force it. They can listen to me. I'm a coach more than I'm a teacher. So I give them the ideas, I tell them some things. If they're headed in the wrong direction, I was like, this might not work out. Why don't you check and see before you do it? And so it does work, and it works really efficiently. I mean, these kids in this particular program produce 1 newspaper and 12 magazines and television, radio, podcasts. They do all this. And, and I'm not telling them what to do all the time. They figure it out pretty well. I went to a preschool here in St. Gallen. It was a little amazing, to be honest. The kids are 3 years old. It's called the Forest School. 3 years old to 7 years old. And they take the train in little groups with one person. So there's groups of maybe 10 kids taking the train to the preschool. They go into the forest, and that's what they do all morning. They just play in the forest. No toys, it's like just playing with each other. And I can tell you, these kids are very self-confident. I didn't see anybody crying, screaming, hanging onto their parent's leg, or, demanding that the teacher do something. I think you want to start early. You want to give kids this opportunity to believe in themselves and that they can do it. And they can do it. I mean, you'll be shocked at what these little kids were doing. They were actually preparing their own lunch. I had to take pictures of this. I was so shocked. So anyway, yes, it is a little bit inefficient, but in the long run, it's much more effective in teaching critical thinking and all the things that you're doing. I mean, what you're doing in this program at the beginning is great. And, giving them an opportunity to work like that, think independently and so forth, instead of just memorizing.
And to immediately become co-responsible for the... But what I'm hearing is actually it may not be that inefficient because A, they have other efficient sources of knowledge acquisition,
right.
Number one, but B also, the point that you're making, in fact both of you, is you also get much more pull from the learners in terms of wanting to learn more. And so at the end of the day, what matters much more is what they learn, but matters much more than how much teaching goes in this way. One last question before...
I want to say one thing. Connected to what you just said, these kids in my program never wanted to go home, ever. I'm not kidding. School would ring, the bell would ring at 3:30, and it's like, are you guys going home or not? And no, they didn't want to leave. And they would be there like maybe 7 or 8 o'clock at night. It's like, you must be hungry now, after all. But so yes, they become very engaged. So sorry.
No. So I want to ask a question before I come to you and ask you how this might or might not play out in a different environment in Brazil. You've been doing this in this Palo Alto High School. How many of your colleagues have you managed to convert? Is the entire school working this way, or are there resistances on the part of some of your colleagues?
So initially there was resistance, as you can imagine, because I'm doing something really different, and actually I'm giving students control, and I'm like respecting them. That was kind of like unheard of. But then the school district set up a program, which was called the Blended Learning Program, and they paid teachers $3,000 to learn how to do it, and about 600 teachers signed up. So a lot of teachers have learned how to do it in Palo Alto. Palo Alto schools are ranked at the top of the state. So as a matter of fact, they're in the top 10. Some of our schools rank number 1. So
the trick was, A, train teachers to learn the skills,
yes,
to behave differently, and also pay them to do the training. So create an incentive, a financial incentive for them to do it.
That's right. Well, teachers, as we all know, don't make a lot of money. So this was a way to pay them for the extra time they were spending, because it took a while for them to change their mindset. And also the other thing that was good is we put them also in groups, just like we want them to do in class. So then they work together and they see how powerful it is to work together. And so they were able to replicate the same thing.
Of course. How could this play out in a different environment like Brazil? One of the things you said is we need to accelerate the revision of curriculum, and clearly this is one of the ways of doing so. So how are you reacting? What are your thoughts when you hear this? Is this also what you guys are trying to do?
First, I agree with everything you guys said. I'm just thinking, how can I do that to 50 million students in a very diverse environment? And I think that's the question that every good politician should be making. How can I make sure that I'm actually fighting for, and that's my personal dream and my professional dream, that Brazil one day will have the best public education in the world. So you guys, look out for competition. We are getting there. But before that happens, like, I do want to discuss those things. They're amazing. But I have to deal with sexual abuse at home in terms of public policy. Children that only receive nutritious food when they are at school. Right. Children that, again, won't have a table in their homes to study, will be exposed to drug abuse and violence, and who literally have their dreams killed every single day. I always say that my fight is that one day every child, regardless of skin color, gender, or any characteristic, will have the right to dream. That right is denied to most children in Brazil. So that's like the question that I leave to you, because I agree with what is being said. And again, we are fighting for this change in the landmark of technical and professional education. We want to discuss certificates and so on. But right now, dropout rates are very high in Brazil, especially after the pandemic. Right now, one of the bills that I'm fighting for is for children, for young students, when they are in middle school, to receive grants to make sure they finish high school. Right. Because, again, we have, out of 5 students, 2 are not finishing high school. And economists have shown in Brazil that those students that don't finish high school, they will live 3 to 4 years less. Like, the absence of education means death to those kids. And I was writing down what you're saying, like, I do believe that my generation, the future generations, they got the biggest challenge ever. Climate change, increasing inequality, threats to democracy, all over the world, including my country. Those are big issues that need us to be flexible, to be cooperative, to have skills that usually we don't get in schools, especially in public schools. But how can I make sure that all of that is being done for white and black students, for rich and poor students, for children who are in urban areas and rural areas? I have some bits of solutions, the ones that I'm mentioning here, that we are fighting really hard because it's extremely hard to put education in the parliamentary agenda. Every fight I started took me 3 years. And then you have to vote against the presidential veto. It's really, really hard. But I'm just wondering, is there some big thing that I'm missing? Like, is there a faster way of doing that? Just one final example. We have started to deal with very violent attacks in schools in Brazil. People went and killed very young children. Like, it breaks my heart to think about it. How do we deal with that? One answer, in my opinion, is social media regulation. They definitely don't want to hear about that in Brazil, but we need to regulate social media. But at the same time, we also need to discuss mental health in school. Because how are those children and teachers' minds after everything that happened? I lost my father to drug addiction. So I know that not discussing mental health or mental issues is very, very, also leads to death. So we are also working on proposals, so we'll have those type of discussions in a country that will say that depression is not an important thing. Anxiety, what is that? So I don't want to make a list of all those big problems because I'm very optimistic. Being in my second mandate with 29 years old, being honest in Brazilian politics is a big statement of optimism. I really believe my country is heading to a very good place. But I just like maybe giving out questions like diversity. I want to make sure that everything we discuss applies to anyone, regardless of whether those children had parents who attended school or not. I want to make sure that all those discussions, they are actually being made for those 50 million and not only for an elite. And I'm not mentioning like, we also have very rich parts of my city, but I'm not concerned about that. I think you got my idea. Again, we need to revolution the whole educational system, but I really need to make sure that this revolution happens to everyone at the same time. You got my provocation.
Can I ask you a question? Yes. And I'm going to come to you in a second, Miriam, to ask about lifelong learning, because right now we're still focusing a lot on early education, but your ADA learning is more of a lifelong learning activity. So I'm coming to this in a second. So I happen to be a professor of leadership and organizational development. One of the things we teach is how do you transform systems. And as I'm listening to you, of course, there's a part of me that's thinking, wow, you know, what energy and what drive she has. There's also a part of me that's wondering, is it possible to change a system that is that large all at the same time? As compared to creating some pockets of innovation that somehow we can learn from. Are there places where you're able to say, well, here, you know, I happen to have an innovator, I happen to have maybe a philanthropic individual who's willing to support. Are there places where you can kind of experiment and then show the positive, the benefits of some of these ideas?
I've been an education activist for many years now. I started young. And when I decided to go into politics, everyone thought I was crazy. I majored in political science and astrophysics from Harvard with a full scholarship. I was the first one in my family to finish high school, and everyone was expecting me to have a big career in the private sector and finally make money. That didn't happen. And I say that because I cannot talk about all the countries, but in my country, I think one of the big flaws is that the people who get the best training and the best opportunities, they definitely don't want to go into politics. So I've tried to be a communicator, I've tried to organize protests, I've done academic research, I've done very cool things, but I always had that feeling that the big transformation was a matter of politics. And at some point I was tired and I decided to run. And I say that because I do believe that most of the audience is trying to do great things or is actually doing great things in academics and the private sector and the social sector, but I definitely feel like I need more companions back in the public sector. So yes, there are amazing things happening in Brazil, like in universities and like small pockets, I think that expression used, but I miss the big transformation. So there is one concept in Brazil. Children will go to school for 3-4 hours a day. So if children stay in school for 7 hours a day, we call it integral education. And I always say back in Brazil, that's what people call education in other countries. This is all messed up. And studies have shown that having children in school for at least 7 hours, doing sports and arts, and having basically what rich children always have, will decrease their mortality rate by half in Brazil. So I'm not saying that all those children will go to the best universities and fund startups, and so some will. I'm a stronger believer in the potential of every child if she or he has the right opportunities. But I'm saying that decreasing mortality rates, like assassination, is that how you say?
Yeah.
By half is a tremendous goal, and I'm really happy with that. So I will be like the lobbyist for the power of the public sector in an area that when I see that, again, students, they don't want to go into the public sector, I would ask to you here, who wants to be a politician here? Because I think that's very important. And if you want to raise your hand, I'll be really happy. I don't know, we have one there.
One.
Oh, we need more.
Two.
I think that's my point. Yeah, thank you.
I think this is very true, and I think this is very true in many countries. Now, you are working with a different population. Those, your fellows, that would be called students in another context, are individuals who are working and they need to rejuvenate some of their skills, in particular around digital and around technology. Tell us about the system that you've developed, about some of the challenges that you faced and how you've overcome them, and also to what extent this system could be scalable in other areas, maybe.
I like that you're phrasing it as people need to rejuvenate some of their skills, so that puts it very nicely. Or maybe we can even go a step further and say they need to rediscover many skills people have, like Esther was describing, when they're kids, for example. And we unlearn so many things in building our careers, and we unlearn so many things that basically make us great human beings, great individuals, because we think we are not allowed to bring them to the table anymore. So an example is, you said people are not lining up to listen to the CEO. Well, I would say I would really be amazed if that wasn't true, but it still is in many regards. They do not line up physically, maybe, but of course, when you look at corporations, when you look at many organizations, you have people who learn that you have to behave in a politically adapted way, because otherwise you will risk your career. And that's exactly the way of educating people, that we should not want to do it, because it doesn't bring out people who think critically, who think by themselves, who dare to make suggestions, who dare to be innovative in approaching new solutions. They always figure out first whether the leadership team is okay with what they're doing. And what we try to do is that we build up a community, and that has grown to way more than 2,000 people yet. We call them fellows because they are not students who receive something from us, and they are supposed to reconnect to their basic skills as bringing something to the table as an enlightened human being, as a critical thinker, and also doing this in a cross-sectional way. So we built this community from many organizations, from the public sector, from the business sector, from civil society, and they work together in large groups and in small groups to really understand that we all have quite the same challenges at the moment, but we tackle them very differently. And learning from each other, learning by interacting, learning by collaborating on an or cross-sectional level is really fruitful. To give you an example, because I love watching this, it's almost like a little theater play all the time. You have a CMO, a chief marketing officer from one company, and you have a leader from the Department of Defense of a national government. And then you have someone managing a factory, an industry factory with 2,000 workers. And they sit together at some point at a table and are supposed to work together. And the first thing that happens is that nothing happens, because they're totally scared. How do we approach each other? And then the one...
Who's the boss here?
Who is the boss here? One guy is in a uniform and the others are not. So many hierarchical and friction issues that regularly are not overcome, because you're not put in the position to really start to work together that way. And then it's very beautiful to observe that it starts to happen step by step, and they get to know each other. They get to know each other in the course of a whole year, being part of our community, and way beyond, because this is supposed to be a lifetime community. And then things start to blossom in a way that I really find very beautiful. We also, of course, check what comes out of that. We are using artificial intelligence to set up a transformational mindset that we follow up with throughout the year, to really give every individual the feedback of how did you involve yourself in the process, and what did you take out of it. And not in terms of factual knowledge, again, but in terms of agility of mindset, resilience, innovative thinking, being able to collaborate, all those kinds of criteria that are missed out in many other ways in our professional lives. And that is very beautiful to observe. And so something arises from that basically builds a lifetime belonging to a community that you can tap into whenever you want. So after that year, people have established their peer-to-peer learning, and they just call each other, or they have their own WhatsApp groups or Signal groups. They meet up in local tables, regional tables, and whenever a problem occurs, they just ask someone from the community and get credible and trustful advice in how to deal with a solution. And that is something, we have built up.
And so this environment involves them having access to asynchronous sort of resources. There's also then some live sessions which are synchronous, and then there's these projects that you organize, that you help set up, and that's where they work in groups across companies, interestingly.
Yeah. Always
which I thought was quite impressive.
Across business, politics, civil society. Let me give the example of live events. We're doing two really big live events every year, and all the fellows come together. And we're doing quite different things than regular conferences are doing. Of course, there are also talks and panels, but the major thing is that we always try to interact with everyone. And for example, one of the challenges we tried out one day was at our last conference, we had like 800 people, and we said spontaneously, so now you have 1 hour to find a solution to this problem. So the question was, what should be regulated on an international level regarding the development of AI? You have to find a solution, you have 1 hour, we give you a lot of tools you can use, organize yourself. And that is so interesting to watch what happens. People are freaked out first, because no one knows, no one said who will be leading this, and what is my role, and how do we do this? And then you see a group of people retreating from the process. These are those people we are very closely watching, because they might not be fitting into the fellowship in the long run, because they go and have a coffee and don't engage. Those are actually not leaders doing that. And then you have other people stepping up and immediately trying to dominate the whole scene. Like, I know how to do this, everyone comes here, so please, you do that, you do that, you do that, and then we'll be able to organize this. Also quite an interesting way of dealing with it. And then you have people really trying to break this down, building smaller groups, trying to organize, and it's a total chaos for 1 hour. Everyone is totally exhausted afterwards. But I had many people coming up to me saying, well, actually, that was the most insightful and impactful experience of learning something I've ever done, because I've understood so much about myself. Also, some critical things I have to think about, I have to tackle, and understanding how we can do this and what people can bring to the table or can't bring to the table regarding what kind of understanding we have to organize such a situation. So this is one example of what we're doing.
And I think what it illustrates again is the power of creating an environment where people will take charge of their own learning, will engage, will create resources, and will do this together. Now, you have heard from all of our panelists, and this is now the time where you have an opportunity to ask questions of your own. There were quite a few. So I see a lady there who was not the first, but she's definitely the most forceful. So we're going to go there first, and then we're going to come here, here as number 2, and then we'll come back here.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Jasko, member of Ukraine Parliament, and I was very interested when there was a question who wants to become a politician and how many hands were up. I want to ask a question that comes from my experience working with people who are 10 and 15 years younger than me. I'm 32. You know, Ukrainians are usually very active and very hardworking people. But something that I see now with the young generation, that there are so many opportunities that are available for them, that actually the question of responsibility somehow and some stability is a big question mark sometimes, because they tend to change many jobs every, 2-3 months sometimes. And my question is, what is the role of education in this? I know in all my surrounding now, in the private sector and also in the political sector, people who are looking for people they all are saying that we want someone more senior because young people, they're great, but they're not stable. And especially now with the war, they all just go abroad. I think it's a problem with the brain drain, but also there is some kind of this question of how to make sure that the young person that comes to your team, whether it's in a company, looks for that his own development in this. It's absolutely fine to change jobs, but not maybe like 5, 10 times. I used to work in the startups also, and I had a lot of people, young people, who would be just switching these jobs. What is the role of education in this? What can be done? Thank you.
Your observation is young people change jobs very often, in fact, so often that it's a little bit of a problem for a number of people who might be interested in hiring them.
I think it's a big problem.
And
the
to what
private
extent is
sector now is
education?
offering very high paid jobs, but sometimes they cannot find reliable people.
So maybe one or two of you, because if we each respond to everything, we'll only have 2 questions. Who wants to take that one?
I'll do it.
Okay. And maybe then I'll ask a second one.
I think the most important thing they can learn are social emotional skills, collaboration. And they don't learn to collaborate, they don't learn social emotional skills if they're sitting in class and listening all the time. They have to practice. So I can tell you the people that put on this conference, they're learning a lot of things, a lot of skills. And so that's what I think they need to learn. They need to believe in themselves. You don't learn to believe in yourself unless you're given that opportunity to believe in yourself. And I'm sorry that you're having that kind of an experience with young people, I guess must be here in this area. You want kids that are going to have grit and be persistent and not give up and not be afraid to say what they think. So I have this acronym in my book called TRICK.
Yep.
And TRICK stands for trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. And that's what I say belongs in every classroom. Trust. You need to trust the students so they trust themselves and they trust each other. Respect. The same thing. They need to respect each other, respect you. You need to respect them. Give them independence instead of telling them what to do all the time. How can you learn to be independent if you don't practice? And collaborate. How to collaborate. Most kids don't learn to collaborate in school at all. And as a matter of fact, until 2005, collaboration was called cheating in most schools. So we need to change that.
And I think what
Kindness.
and kindness.
And kindness goes a long way, as we all know in the world.
By the way, you have in your own university a strong focus on compassion.
That's correct, and empathy. I completely agree. I think that you need to focus a lot on positive psychology as well. People need to build grit. And, a constant focus on negative messages actually kind of reduces grit, raises anxiety. And so this is something to think about. And then the second thing I'd say is that, if you look at performance of people versus the level of stress that they're under, it is actually a non-linear function, right? So if stress is too low, people are bored and they're not engaged. Stress goes to a certain level, it's positive, and they get engaged, they get into a zone. If the stress gets beyond a certain level, then you have anxiety and lower performance. So one of the things that we calibrate quite carefully at HSG University is we want to make sure that students are engaged. So you're giving them challenging assignments, because if there's zero stress, they're not engaged, they don't build grit, they don't perform. But if the stress gets too high, you also start to see anxiety, and you're sort of undermining performance, you're undermining grit.
And I think, of course, the implication...
Can I add one more thing? I think what you're describing is could be seen from these perspectives, but what comes to my mind is also that somehow people are tending to trying to optimize. For example, the boost of their career. That could also be a symptom, what you described, of these kinds of optimization. And I think education actually would need to take the role to help people understand by experience that some certain kind of persistence is needed to really get into a deeper understanding of what you can gain from something. So you need some period of time to really understand what you can take and what you can bring to the table. And if this is like very short-termed all the time, that will be not very helpful, not only for the employee, but also from the employer perspective, but also from the employee's perspective.
So we need to all relearn delayed gratification.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yes.
Can I jump? Is it too bad?
Please.
Very quickly. First, it's really nice to meet you. I was really happy when I saw you were attending the symposium. Two comments. I might be myself not a good example of that, but I started working at a very young age, like doing embroidery and then teaching lessons privately to help at home. But when I finally left university, I was very lost. Like I got a job as an intern in a big company because I wanted to learn about gestão. Someone help. Management. And then the week I was promoted, I left and I went to work as a radio commentator on education to receive 10% of the salary. And then I left and I had like a small experience in the third sector, organizing students, because everything that I did felt like this is not contributing to public education. So if you see my curriculum, I always say that to young people, like it's pretty bad. It's like very short experiences, many different experiences, but I finally found my place in politics. And I think that's what I was looking for. And I say that because I do think that tends to be worse with time. Like we are dealing with bigger and bigger issues. Like how do you solve climate change? Like a single country cannot solve that. And that brings a lot of anxiety, but at the same time, I do think that our educational system is not preparing us to have resilience, persistence, to have all those mental skills that will help us deal with those problems. And just, I'm better with asking questions than giving answers, but what purpose will look like when we have robots doing our jobs, when we cannot feel secure in a 30, 40-year job, like, this is what makes people find purpose in life when we talk about like the majority of people. So I'm just giving the question back because with bigger and like world issues, but at the same time with us having to change jobs so many times because the job will disappear, I think this is one of the most philosophical questions of our generation. What does purpose look like when you don't have the same job for decades? I don't have the answer, but I think that's a very important question.
So no, but I think I had said we were coming here as a number two.
I just wanted to readdress, connect a couple of dots.
I understand, but if we do that, then we have no tracking.
Hi, my name is Nirvana Yaga. I study an MA in education with Montessori, which, as some people might know, is a pedagogy really based on hands-on learning and children using concrete materials. When we talk about curriculum design for the new generation, there is understandably a really big focus on technology and children learning how to use technology effectively. But as a qualified teacher, I've seen 4- and 5-year-olds entering school unable to hold a pencil or use scissors and try to swipe on their exercise books because of they are not using kind of hands-on practical skills the way that children were even 10 years ago. So I suppose my question to anyone who is involved in like curriculum building or designing what schools should look like in the future is how can we balance teaching these really necessary digital skills with making sure that we don't go too far and end up losing the physical skills that humans have evolved for millennia, and whether there is a risk of potentially going too far and having a curriculum that is too digital and potentially not analog enough.
Maybe before they answer, a quick question to you. How long did it take them to learn how to hold a pencil and...
I mean, it varied depending on children, but we especially found after the COVID lockdowns, it was a question of the curriculum was then not working because, you know, you expect a 6-year-old to have a certain level of dexterity.
So you're saying it took quite a while for them
Yes.
to relearn...
Yeah, it was not a matter of weeks. It was more like a matter of months.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's also a very critical thing, by the way, for parents. For a friend of mine, she has a 12-year-old boy, and he just said to her, actually, why are you pestering me with writing these things all the time? ChatGPT can do it much better than I can. So, I mean, how do we even argue in favor of learning to write and to read? I'm totally arguing, like you do, in favor of that. But this will be a challenge because everything is so convenient. And if we don't learn to read and to write, we will totally lose our humanity in many ways. And we will become dumb, like the little figures in the movie Wall-E being transported around with a conveyor belt and fed and doing nothing else. That's a very dystopian perspective. But I think you're getting to an extremely critical question we have to address in the education system.
So I would like to say that it's not just the teachers that are teaching, it's the parents. We have a whole generation of helicopter parents that are doing everything for their kids. Little kids can learn to hold pencils, and the parents have to stop doing everything for the kids, stop worrying that they're not going to be able to do stuff themselves. They're treated like little princes, you know, or princess. And so when you don't learn to do things for yourself, you don't feel empowered. And so that's part of your problem, especially if you're dealing with Montessori, because Montessori usually goes up to grade 2. And, you know, the kids coming into your program are not learning the basic skills. I'm sure this is true here in Switzerland, and not only in the US and Western Europe. And the helicopter parenting has got to stop. It's really not producing the kinds of people that we need.
But of course, not an easy problem to solve, because there's already a lot of teachers, but there's even more parents.
It's the parents.
But I think the point that you're raising is a very fair one. Yeah. What's the right balance? I certainly remember that when we moved to Asia, the school said to my kids, now you're going to do everything by computer. And you know, you make notes and you read on computers. And I remember raising my hand and said, but you realize that for the foreseeable future, exams will be done being handwritten. And they said, yeah, but don't worry, the kids will be fine. And I remember thinking, I don't know that the kids will be fine, because it's you know, if you do 12 hours a day this, and then I'm asking you to handwrite, so clearly there is an issue of emphasis on technology versus more manual and older tech. There was a question here. Yes, I'm looking at you. Voilà. Well, the person to your left, but maybe to your right. But maybe you two ladies can find a way.
Hi, I'm Sabrina. I'm from Hong Kong. So I'm currently working with philanthropies and also nonprofits for social impact projects that can be at scale. So I think we all believe that, like, to truly achieve education equity and also all the human development potential, we actually need to have, like, impact at scale. And then we also, I guess we all, like, somehow agree that education is one of the oldest and also one of the most, like, resistant to change kind of institutions and systems, like, in the world. So I wonder, what is the end game for the initiatives that you've been working towards or creating, and, like, what does it take to get there? So is it to target public education system? Is it to sustain what you've been doing? But then how do you create impact at scale so that it truly reach the target population that you really want to influence?
Impact at scale, of course, is what you're after, right?
Yeah.
So,
but I think yes, please go
I
ahead.
think that education is not, just like you said, not going to change quickly, because it's incredibly hard to change an institution that is developed to perpetuate tradition. And so that's the basis of it. So my suggestion is you change just 20% of the time in the class. 20% of the time is the creative time. 1 day a week, instead of 5 days a week, the same thing, 1 day a week when the kids get to organize it themselves and do what they think themselves. So I think, for example, in Brazil, I mean, there's a lot of those kids that don't have the skills that they need, perhaps, but you know, they learn it from each other. And if you give them that opportunity to work together, I mean, just like you, they will be able to do a lot more, and then they'll feel empowered. They feel like they can do it. And so what we were talking about is lack of persistence. They don't want to stay in a job for a long time. They need to persist. They need to learn grit. You don't learn grit when you don't feel self-confident, when you don't believe in yourself. And you learn to believe in yourself when you're given the opportunity to do it. It's just like swimming. You know, you can't learn to swim by watching someone else swim. You've got to do it, and then you feel good about it. So I think we need to change a part of the curriculum right away. Just 1 day a week, 20% of the time. And then slowly we can move to perhaps impacting the other 4 days of the week. I've been trying to change education now for a long time, and I can tell you it's really hard. And as I said when I first started, it's the teachers, because the teachers are trained to teach, you know, direct instruction. And then, you know, what do? They don't know what to do. They feel like they're not doing their job. And, you know, I don't want to blame the teachers because they get that training. And then, as you said, politics, the school boards, the politicians, they're like, what are they looking at? The test scores. What does the test score test for? Rote learning. That's what they're all testing for. The whole system's based on rote learning, teachers telling kids what to do. You're not going to be innovative, you're not going to be creative as long as the main goal is rote learning. So that's what my suggestion is. 20% time.
And I think one of the key components of the answer is you can't change the whole system overnight. And so you do have to create, again, pockets of experimentation that then allow the development of skills and confidence. You want to intervene on this?
I just want to second everything you said. If you have to choose one player to change education, choose teachers. And from mental health to social skills, soft skills, to technology, many programs have tried to be implemented in Brazil with no effect because teachers were not involved.
Right.
So you see all those news about computers being distributed and iPads, but teachers don't know how to use them. So either children will use them to play because they do know how to use them, or they will be locked up at some random room. So. And we need to do that not only through initial education, I think that's how we call it in English, but through continued education of those professionals, of teachers. Because, like, they are the ones who are at the schools right now, so they need to get that retrain and that support that they don't get in Brazil. When we talk about mental health, in the pandemic, out of 10 students in my state, in public schools, 7 had symptoms of anxiety or depression. Like, that's huge, 70%. But how can I expect schools to be prepared to deal with mental health when teachers never had someone supporting them in their mental health journey? So I totally agree with you.
This, by the way, is something that we've seen in many countries, right? And you just made the point, is teachers tend to treat kids the way the school boards and the ministries treat the teachers.
That's correct.
So,
the teachers need trick in their lives too. We need to trust and respect them, give them a lot of independence in the classroom, collaborate, let them collaborate, and treat them with kindness. And we are not doing that, unfortunately.
on the right, it changes the dynamic of the room.
Thank you so much for this great panel. My name is Sian Ruas. I'm a former member of the International Students Committee. And you raised the question of how can we actually transform the whole society also from a political perspective, because it's so hard to pass laws that go in the right direction. So maybe my question would be, besides focusing on educating children and giving them collaborative methods, maybe also focus on politicians. You know, like they also need collaborative methods and how to produce effective policy. So right now I'm working in a startup, a politically neutral startup, and what we do is policy sprints. So in the very beginning, we gather politicians from different parties together with experts, and then at a round table in 2-day workshops, they create policies together instead of one party starting a policy. So maybe that's also something to think about.
Interesting.
Very creative.
Good idea.
Well, I agree with you. And I know that's a very deep and complex problem for me to try to discuss it here. But I do feel that how much democracy is being threatened around the world has a lot to do with these uncertain times that you mentioned. We don't really know who we can trust. Social media is really distorting the debate. And we don't know who is financing that distortion. It's really complex. But the common citizen feels like, okay, I don't know who to trust. I don't know if I can trust the newspaper, the TV, this politician. So this system is always against me. And one way of doing that, like in a very basic level, is make sure that our children are politically literate. In Brazil, we don't learn what city councilors do. We don't know who is responsible for the hole in the street, for the public transportation. So if you don't know that minimum about the language in law and politics, how can you trust? How can you comprehend the system? And going a step further, and I'll make that point again, how can we make sure that the best trained and with the best opportunity students do want to go into politics? If you turn to your family in Brazil and say you want to be a politician, they'll be like, why are you doing that? Is it like, I want to deal with drugs? Like, that's the same impact. I'm not kidding. Like, people are like, I do want to be corrupt or anything like that. So I agree with you. That's a very interesting idea. I would learn to hear more. But to be sincere, knowing my colleagues, even though there are many that I deeply admire, I'm more into invest in new politicians. So make sure we have more black, female, diverse, young people actually going to politics, because some of them, I don't know if it's possible to recover.
Miriam, you want to intervene?
I like your question a lot. Thank you for that. And I think it's a very practical approach also that we have to think about. So first of all, in politics, it's very necessary because you have the sectoral thinking, department, and they just don't speak to each other. So I give you a very concrete example. In our program, the ADA Fellowship, we have the German government taking part for quite a couple of years now. And they're sending, like every other partner organization, a group of 30 people each time. And we request that, which makes our business much harder because we could just tell them, send everyone you want. That would be business-wise much smarter maybe, but we don't want that. We want a group of 30 people, a diverse group, first of all, like you were saying, and a group from different parts of the organization on a leadership level. Why is that? Because they start to get to know each other, first of all, and they regularly have never heard of each other before, be it in politics, be it in corporations, wherever. So they start to interact, and then immediately you have a small network in the first round, a growing network in the second round, a larger network in the third round of this program of people who really know each other, know how to interact, know how to collaborate on solving problems. And if you build that, that's a first step, a tiny one, I admit that, but a first step to scale the idea of change that comes from within an organization, from within a society, and then step by step grows broader. Such approaches might help, I don't know, but might help to get this done, what we are talking about here, to reform, to revolutionize in tiny steps a system that is very, very stiff and very risk and change adverse.
So, very good idea to raise the skills of politicians in cooperation. A quick comment, because it's going to be more a comment, because we are reaching the end of this session, unfortunately.
Sure. So, first of all, thank you for a fantastic panel in every respect. I think the points that Tabata and Patrick talked about is so important to all of us who come from developing countries. I come from India, and together with my friend Nader and Ria, we're involved in starting a university. And we're trying to deal with this question of, how do you provide access where you really have an impact across the wider population, because the problems we have are very similar to Brazil, very similar to Africa, while at the same time creating those leaders. And the question that I was going to ask, but which I'll ask you right after the session,
exactly,
is how do you do this? How do you get selection right? So how do you foster that wide base so that people have inclusion and access, while at the same time developing the right leaders? That selection process is, I think, something that we have to work at getting right.
Thank you very much. At IMD, the purpose of our school is we want to challenge what is and inspire what could be, to develop leaders who transform organizations and contribute to society. I hope that this hour and a half that you spend with these 4 extraordinary individuals challenged your current views and hopefully also inspired you to think maybe a little bit more boldly, to be a little bit more confident about the future, to also try to pick battles that you can win in order to build momentum, because God knows the world needs to improve the way we educate the citizens and the leaders of tomorrow. Please give them a warm hand of applause. And I'm told that, once again, the University of St. Gallen has plans to offer an excellent lunch next door. Bon appétit!